Medieval dungeons weren't just prison cells. They were death machines with a queue. While modern media often depicts dank stone rooms with straw-stuffed mattresses and barred slits of daylight, the actual reality was vastly more horrific. These weren't mere detention centers. They were underground torture complexes meticulously engineered to destroy human beings, physically, mentally, and spiritually, before eventually killing them in the slowest, most excruciating ways possible. Here's a number to chill your spine. 85% of those thrown into medieval dungeons died within just a few weeks. Not from formal execution, but from starvation, untreated disease, and living conditions so appalling, modern high-security prisons look like five-star accommodations by comparison. Dungeons weren't accidents of history. They were carefully crafted tools of torment, built by people who had mastered the dark art of maximizing human misery. Once you grasp the truth, you'll find yourself appreciating every human right you possess, and terrified at how quickly society can descend back into orchestrated cruelty. Dungeons didn't erupt from nothing. They evolved, honed over centuries into the most efficient systems of human degradation in recorded history. And the way ordinary people constructed extraordinary evil tells us something chilling about the human psyche. It began around 800 AD, when Charlemagne's legal reforms first made imprisonment part of the formal punishment system. His capitularies mentioned subterranean holding areas for those awaiting trial. These cells were supposed to be temporary. The nightmare began when rulers discovered that prolonged imprisonment, with its slow, dehumanizing decay, was more effective than swift execution. By 1000 AD, nearly every major castle, monastery, and city fortress had integrated dungeon systems. But it wasn't until 1252, under Pope Innocent IV, that dungeon use truly exploded. That year, the Church issued at Extirpanda a papal bull authorizing torture to extract confession from alleged heretics. This wasn't some rogue cleric gone mad. It was official religious policy that transformed dungeons into psychological torture labs. Medieval theologians developed disturbing rationale for suffering. They believed agony could purify the soul, that breaking a person physically was an act of divine compassion. Thus began the era of theological terror. Dungeons were restructured from crude stone boxes into intricate systems of psychological manipulation. Different regions across Europe became centers of unique torment, like dark franchises of fear. The Tower of London excelled at high-profile political executions. The Chateau d'If refined its own horrors, pioneering water-based torture chambers with adjustable levels that could slowly drown inmates over days or weeks, instilling terror long before death came. Perhaps the most haunting dungeon design was the oubliette, from a French for forgotten place. These bottle-shaped holes carved deep into bedrock were accessible only from trapdoors above. Inmates were dropped down, then abandoned. No judgment, no sentence, just darkness, silence, and the slow arrival of death. Their very purpose, total erasure. Dungeon architecture tells the real story. These weren't designed to correct or reform. They were built to obliterate. No windows, no air circulation, no drainage, often 30 to 40 feet below the surface. Screams never reached outside ears. Walls curved inward to intensify claustrophobia. Over time, castle architects competed to create even more psychologically devastating structures. Some dungeons featured false floors hiding spike pits. Others had acoustic torture chambers that amplified the smallest drip of water into maddening echoes. The aim wasn't simply captivity, it was mental breakdown. By the High Middle Ages, dungeon building had become its own field of mastery. Specialized builders, itinerant artisans of agony, traveled from fortress to fortress, sharing schematics for optimizing suffering. These weren't accidental cruelties. These were crafted, planned, professionally executed evil. At the core of medieval law was one grim principle. The punishment must eclipse the crime, and the process of punishment must be worse than the punishment itself. So what could send you to such a place? Just about anything. Medieval law was a cocktail of paranoia and power. At the top of the hierarchy, crimes against the church, heresy, blasphemy, sorcery. These charges were nearly impossible to refute. If you denied the accusations, it only proved guilt. After all, true heretics always lied. Witchcraft accusations were often based on little more than village gossip or misfortune. A bad harvest, a sick animal, a child's death. Joan of Arc is a perfect example. burned at the stake for heresy, but her true crime was challenging gender roles and claiming divine visions. The English needed her silence for political reasons, so they cloaked the execution in religious pretext. Her trial records show how anything could be warped into proof of demonic influence. Crimes against the nobility were just as lethal. Treason encompassed everything from open rebellion to minor disrespect. William Wallace was brutally tortured for 6 hours before his death, not for posing an actual threat, but for daring to challenge the social structure. His execution was meant as a lesson in terror. Even more twisted, property crimes were often punished more severely than violence. Stealing something worth more than 12 pence could mean hanging, yet killing a man in a duel might only result in a small fine. Human life was expendable. Property wasn't. Medieval laws also revealed deep anxieties about power and order. There were crimes like barratry, being too good a lawyer. Skilled legal minds were seen as threats to authority. Forestalling, buying food before it reached the marketplace, was illegal. Night walking, a woman out alone after dark, could get you thrown in a dungeon for challenging social norms. Women were particularly vulnerable. The Scold's bridle, a horrific metal mask, was used to silence outspoken women. Female adultery led to branding, while male infidelity was often overlooked. Prostitutes were mutilated. Their clients, usually unpunished. Religious minorities fared even worse. Jews, barred from many professions, were forced into moneylending, then demonized as greedy. During plagues or social unrest, entire Jewish communities were accused of well poisoning or ritual murder, with no evidence needed. Even poverty was criminalized. Vagrancy laws made homelessness a punishable offense. Unemployment was considered idleness, and idleness was sin. Begging for bread was disturbing the peace. Being poor wasn't unfortunate. It was illegal. Children weren't spared. Criminal responsibility began at age 7. Kids could be imprisoned, tortured, or even executed for petty theft or loitering. There was no concept of juvenile justice. Children were just small adults with fewer rights. And inside the dungeons, those children became part of an underground society that mirrored the horrors above, only darker.